The thing which I'm wondering is like this is long, but there are people who might find value in this and just watch it and kind of go, yeah, I'm a worship leader. I've not got a clue. People aren't having these conversations.
Well, they're not, and
So that's where I'm like, do I just put this out and only certain people will watch it anyway, so it doesn't matter. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah. Um, the problem is, as I said throughout the thing, the main bulk of it, like we don't talk about Bruno. These people don't like. I'm sure these kind of conversations, even amongst worship leaders and ministries, are possibly happening to a certain extent, but they don't want them to be public conversations.
Hey,
Hello,
how you doing?
I'm all right, mate. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thanks. I'll start recording this. Record. Is that recording? Yeah, cool. Yeah, so yeah, we've spoken on the phone for
Yes.
for ages.
I have the perfect face for radio and podcasting. It's like when you see Steve Lamacq for the first time, and you're like, "Wow, that's what you look like."
So I thought for the purposes of what we're doing, like I don't know, I never know what's gonna kind of go up, and my all the sort of videos I've made so far are so like off the cuff.
Yeah.
like yesterday, I was like, I should make a video, and I woke up that morning and thinking, oh, it's prophecy. That's the thing. So I'm not that like strategic with this. I feel like it's a lot more personal. So we've spoken before. I know you run a brewery,
Yeah.
which I'm very jealous of. But what the thing that you responded to most recently was that kind of adult grooming stuff.
Yeah, about the music, you mean?
Oh yeah, sorry about
Yeah,
music.
yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how should we play this? I mean, from my perspective, I think it'd be great to get an idea of why that music side sort of relates to you and stuff.
I can talk the hind legs off a donkey, which my mum passed away recently, in a eulogy that I said that she could pretty much talk to anyone about anything. So I like to think that I've kind of inherited that from her. So I'm happy to just go and
Yeah. Okay.
do with it what you want.
And I'm sorry about your mum.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. It's a long time coming. She had MS and Parkinson's for over 40 years.
Oh gosh, right.
It just gradually declined. Finally took its toll on her body, really. But she was a faithful Christian, and she really brought the faith to life, and in a way that was really real because of her illnesses. She did at points pray for healing and stuff, but and believed that it was possible. But I think she accepted that God used her and her condition for his purposes and his glory, and so never pushed too hard into it, because it opened up so many doors to share about Jesus and to have conversations with people, and not in a kind of like turn or burn kind of way, just in a kind of like, well, Jesus gives me strength, this is what you've done for me. And so her legacy in that way, she never really had a job. She wasn't that eloquent. She really couldn't use a full stop or capital letters when texting you. You get the most, crazily punctuated text messages. But so I can talk. So is in short. So I guess maybe I should just start by sharing my thoughts on the video you shared.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
If that's cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
So I just for context, I was a worship pastor, leader, coordinator, guru, whatever you want to call it.
Stick with guru.
There are so many terms. It's funny, and it's like at one point I really wanted to be the worship pastor. It's like, who in the UK uses the term pastor? Like but it was the term. So. But after I left, I kind of jokes, but because trying to explain stuff to quote unquote non-Christians, people who aren't in the church, using the kind of language that's often in churches, it feels really kooky. And I only discovered that through the brewing when I started having conversations with what I call real people out in the real world.
Beer drinkers.
Beer drinkers, just your average person. I remember before I got into brewing, and I'd be in the local park with my kids, and I might strike up a conversation with another dad, and they'd be like, they'd say, "Oh, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a worship pastor or whatever." And like the shutter would go, and the conversation would just close down. And I used, back in the day, I probably used to think, "Oh, it's because I'm a Christian, and Satan is closing down conversations," or some other crazy thing. Maybe that's a slight caricature, but I used to think, well, maybe they feel uncomfortable, but maybe the thing that made them feel uncomfortable was just the terminology. They're just like, I don't know what that is. I don't know if I want to ask what that is.
Yeah.
So anyway, I did that for a long time. My whole life, when I became a Christian in 2001, was geared to, as a musician, was geared towards that.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to do. That's what felt like God had said. Like I had a.
Did you play in bands before?
Oh yeah. So from school, I got to like Oasis.
Yeah, to be.
I was thrilled when I got a ticket for it recently.
Oh, did you? Just one?
I was in like 2000th in the queue when they opened. I was shaking. I'm going to get one.
Oh, really?
And then when I got there, I was pressing the button. It was like it kept coming. There was an error. No, there is no error. I finally got through, and I was like, I did. A friend of mine who's a vicar said, "Oh, did you pray for it?" And I said, "Yeah, and fasted, mate." But I did actually pray. I did actually pray for one. That's a whole other theological conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
God gives parking spaces and Oasis tickets, but doesn't cure X, Y, and Z. But we'll park that. Sorry, what was it?
No, you were saying, so you always thought when you became a Christian in 2001, you thought,
Yeah,
well,
was
music
it. So
was the thing, worship was the thing.
I had a.
Where did you become a Christian, and how?
Well, through drug taking, through just drugs and rock and roll, basically the band. I just kind of felt like my life was going in a direction I didn't want it to. My dad was also a policeman, so that kind of made smoking weed and taking other things a little bit suspect. And I just felt like I was getting sucked down into the mire with it. I didn't like who I was becoming. And I was at home one evening. This is like 2001, so at Christmas time. And I used to be on the dole, like me and my mate, we were going to be like bigger than the Beatles. Which was mostly just me and him sat in his room smoking weed. We were writing good tunes and stuff, but I don't think we had the motivation or impetus to really do anything until we both cleaned up our acts. And I remember watching Richard. Do you remember Richard and Judy, the morning? So that was on, and every morning they had like a different primary school doing a bit of the nativity with tea towels on their heads and all the rest of it. And I just remember thinking, that's so pantomime. I bet it didn't happen like that. Because I've always, because I grew up my mum was a Christian from when I was a young age. And so I've always had that there. And I went to a Church of England school, so it was always there.
Yeah.
But I think that it didn't really mean anything. And so I saw that and I was like, I bet it didn't happen like that. And I was at home on a rare evening and my dad had put a bookshelf up for me and I was reading all kinds of stuff by Hunter S. Thompson, who wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Stuff like Dice Man, other kind of like books on the occult and what I thought was like spiritual things. Cause I was getting into like lucid dreaming and astral projection and the occult and all sorts of stuff. And I'd found a Gideon's Bible and I put it on the shelf because I thought because I was into my Beatles, what I thought Maharishi phase. I thought I'll put that on my shelf and make me look a bit learned and spiritual. And this voice, which I now believe to be the voice of God, said to me, like, why don't you read your Bible? Because I was trying to read this Hunter S. Thompson book and I wasn't quite getting into it. And I thought, no, I'm not going to read that. And then this voice reasoned with me and said, why don't you just read it for the Christmas story? So I thought, fine, I will. And I thought, like, Matthew will evidently be the birth of Jesus, John will be the death, and the other two will be the in-between bits. And so when I got to the end of Matthew 2, I was like, oh, is that it? But by that point, it's like, they don't say in those nativities about Joseph wanting to secretly divorce Mary. They keep that out of schools, don't they? So I was like, oh, keep reading. What else is in there, that I've been told? And as I got to the Beatitudes, like, it just felt like I was what I was looking for. I was just like, this is what I've been searching for. So I pretty much... Obviously, my mum's influence was there all the time, but I pretty much became a Christian just through reading the Bible. I started.
and Richard and Judy.
I'm Richard and Judy. Yeah, I've never looked at it like a fag song. Yeah. And so it just went from there really. And I started going to church at my mum's local church, and because I was into music and stuff. Like the only Christian music I ever heard was Cliff Richard, which is how my mum became a Christian through his music. And like Power Praise Volume 4, and I was just like, that's the cheesiest thing I've ever heard. Although there's some real face-melting guitar solos in some of those records, and so a friend of mine who was a few years younger was all like, he was about 15 or 16 at the time. I was in my about 20, or if that. No, I wasn't. A bit about 19. Yeah, 19 or 20. And he was like, "Oh, you should check out this music from Soul Survivor, Matt Redman, Delirious, all those
yeah,
all that crowd." And I did, and I was like, "Oh wow, this is great. This is really good." And so I got into it and felt like God was calling me to become a worship insert title here.
Guru. Let's stick with Guru.
Worship guru here. And I went to a worship conference with my friend Rich down in Eastbourne called Worship Together. And I had this really quite profound, powerful vision when a worship leader called Martin Lazelle laid hands on me and prayed for me, and of me walking through this desert with this guitar and all these people in rags following me to Jesus, and just this voice that lead them like Pied Piper. So it's really quite profound. And it was so funny in my young head, my young starstruck Christian head, when I opened my eyes and I don't know Martin Lazelle, but like he said, what was going on there? And I told him, and we had this conversation. And then I went, "Are you Martin Lazelle? I really like your music." So cringeworthy. But after that, immediately after, I started feeling really sick, and then I got I got food poisoning. So the rest of the thing, I was like throwing up and bottom end as well, and I took that as a sign from God that well, obviously there's spiritual oppression, all that kind of charismatic stuff, which I'd kind of opened myself up to. Must be Satan. I used to be of the ilk of like, I've lost my keys, the devil's hidden them, kind of thing. Well, I was obviously young and impressionable and a bit stupid, really. But it went from there, really. So I got involved in like a gap year at a church in Sheffield, St Tom's, which was called Tribal Training at the time, although they changed it to Form halfway through the year, and we were all like, "Oh, what a silly name!" As if like Tribal Training was a really like normal name. But then a really good guy and still a friend of mine called Gareth, who was the worship director. That was actually his official title. He sort of took me in his wing, and he's been great ever since. Really, just a really good friend and really, really kind of solid person and mentor, and over the years and stuff. But it was helpful to learn from him, and I really wanted to become basically like him or a Matt Redman type and have that role. So set my face towards that, started writing songs and making records and like self-funded type stuff, trying to get a record deal with Integrity Music or Kingsway as it was called back then, or whoever would take me, basically.
Yeah.
Please sign me. I'm really good. And it just felt like we're pushing water up a hill, really. I got involved in the sort of parent church of, I was at St Thomas's Philadelphia, but we moved up to the parish church, St Thomas's Crooks, which is the church where there was the 9 o'clock service, that whole church scandal.
Chris Brain.
Yeah. And all that stuff.
Which is still being...
Yeah, well,
still
the
very
trial's
current.
still going on, I think, at the moment.
Yeah.
A lot of people are still affected by it naturally. And unfortunately, even now, that they're still trying to pick up the peak, not as a church as a whole, but that there are remnants still of them still having to deal with that.
Just pausing you there, that's something I've been sort of thinking about lately, literally, yesterday. What's his name? Tom, who's the actor, plays in Venom and everything? Tom Hardy. Right. He talks about having residue from acting roles.
Right.
And I was thinking, well, what's the residue that we get from church? What's the residue we get from abusive characters? What's the residue we get from, as I was talking about yesterday, like these kind of prophetic contexts? And I'm kind of stopping you a little bit because in some ways I'd love to just kind of look at that a little bit. So,
yeah.
So going into, with Gareth, I've forgotten Gareth's name.
Gareth Robinson.
Yeah, Robinson. I've met
Yeah,
him. I'm sure I met him a couple of times because I was involved a little bit with Crooks.
Right.
I was going to do a gap year. I ended up going to.
It'd have been called Yaps back then.
Yeah, that's right. When I was old, because I'm older than you. But yeah, no, I think I told you I went to South Carolina with Mal Kaladin, and
Yes.
so
Yes, I remember you saying. Yeah.
I know that world fairly well, and I dated a girl actually who went to Sheffield University very briefly, only to find out she was already dating someone who was in Japan. Anyway.
Oh dear.
Welcome to life in your late teens or whatever it was. Where was I? Yeah. So what would be good to know is when you've kind of got into that stage of he's taken under your wing. He was the kind of northern version, right, of the southern boys.
Yeah.
I mean, he really was, wasn't he?
Well, he was from he went to this. He was in the same school. He was Matt Redman at the same school.
Oh.
So he's from Watford.
Oh, right.
And so I remember him saying something along the lines of like, I think he went to a different church though.
Right.
Yeah. So he knows Matt, you know,
Right.
But he I think he possibly went to university in Sheffield, which is how he ended up there.
Yeah. Okay, so he's not a proper northerner at all.
No, not really.
So you tell me about how you had this, and I think we've got a real similarity in that music was something that just was for me. It was my the way I could communicate. It was the way I could get people to listen to me. It was the way I could connect with girls. It was the way I could really enjoy connecting with other guys as well. Like when you play music and you get to that point where it's like about the music rather than about you, it's just such a privilege, right? So bringing that into church was just felt so exciting and such an opportunity. For you, how did that start shaping like your direction, like your money?
Well,
like how you started making a life?
I think it's interesting because for what you just said about the music becoming about the thing and the enjoyment of the thing rather than it being about you, that didn't happen for me for a long time. And that's something actually I think that God had to undo in me through this whole process of me leaving the job to become a brewer, because I'd put so much out of my identity and brokenness into being the worship guru, like the capital W, capital G, or whatever. Like that's, I wanted to be Nick Lord TM, like or like the artist, like a Tim Hughes, Brian Johnson, Martin Smith type. You know, I wanted my name to be up there with them,
right.
and like that wasn't all completely selfish ambition. And the analogy I often use, and this is a caveat to anything I say, is whether we're talking about this or my deconstruction journey or charismatic church or whatever, it's like the wheat and the tares. Do you know that parable where Jesus says like an enemy came in and sowed all these tares? Like tares look very similar to wheat. They don't look the same, but look very, very similar. If they're in a whole field, if I'm holding them hand in hand, you can tell the difference. If they're in a whole field, you can't. They're that similar, and just amongst all the three. And that's what it's like. It's like the threads are so entwined that it's hard to pick out what's God, what isn't, what was me, what was the Holy Spirit and stuff. So there was a lot of that going on for me as well.
I mean, that's massive, and I know like no one would really. You'd admit that in I used to, but you're saying it so kind of candidly that, like you kind of go, hang on, really, you know, because the whole point was, what was the whole point? What was the whole point?
I've got no skin in the game anymore. as far as being a worship artist is concerned, and this is partly why I want to talk to you, because of what I didn't feel like. Obviously, it was a short video, and having had a foot in that world, and working in A&R for a little bit in a Christian record label as well.
Yeah, what did I miss? What did I miss? Because
sorry.
yeah,
Well, that was after. So so just in a nutshell,
yeah,
became a worship pastor guru. Did a whole bunch of things. Worship Central Academy, like leading a satellite camp thing for the Worship Central Academy, recording songs and so on. God kind of took away. It felt like God took away the grace for all that from me, and all of a sudden I started questioning everything, deconstructing basically. Particularly the sort of churchology type stuff, as well as the faith stuff, but like the way we do church and worship pastor thing. And then it all ended rather badly as I moved out of the church to start brewing. And the brewery, there was kind of an overlap between the two. And I brewed at a local brewery for a while and did my beers there as well. And then I set up my business, which is what I've done now, Hop Forward. But as I was setting that up, I worked for like about 18 months from 2018, might have been 2 years actually, 2018 until just before the pandemic. I mean, perfect time to go full time with my business. For a friend of mine who runs a record label. And I was head of A&R, so I worked with other like Christian artists and worship leaders. And I've got a load of respect for my mate. He's a really solid guy, but I don't think we share the same kind of church experience. So for me, I felt quite triggered by the whole thing. And I've said this to him, like I just found it really difficult doing that. And seeing the mechanics of what goes on, behind the scenes, and again, it's the wheat.
What would some of the mechanics that you're?
Well, just like the things about royalties, and if we get X amount of streams, then we earn X amount of income, or the whole money side of it. And again, this is the whole wheat and tares thing. It's like it's not wrong to make money, even if you're a Christian record label. It's not wrong to make money, but it's when. And this comes back to what you're saying about being candid, because I've got no skin in the game. I feel like I can be more.
Do you think it is? Like I've got to the stage where I think it actually might be wrong.
How so? What, the making money from it? Or?
Yeah. So I was chatting with my neighbour, just happened to be on a dog walk yesterday, and we were walking the same route, and I haven't seen her in about 6-7 months. And she was asking what I was up to and all that sort of stuff. She started speaking to me because she knows I was Christian. She grew up in that kind of environment. We spoke about Welby. And I said, the Archbishop gets about 90 grand as a salary. And the chap that oversees the Synod and the Bishop's Council is called William Nye. He makes 180. Mm-hmm. And who's really got the power, right? That was our conversation. What she said to me was 90 grand. Is that to be the Archbishop? And I said, and you can take this being wherever you come from as, is that a lot or not a lot?
Right.
Now, I know that vicars, well, when I was back then, the stipend was tiny, right?
Well, I was looking it up on Sunday.
Right.
I think at the lowest end, it's something like 26 grand.
Yeah, exactly. I said 24 to her, so I'm glad I was warm. I think it is important to talk about money, and I think Soul Survivor's built on money. Personally, I think that Gareth Robinson and those guys, and I knew guys through HCB as well when I was in the church plant there. There was a heck of a lot of money to be made from this. Write a book, you make lots of money. In the same way that you were talking about the wheat and the chaff of your motivation of being involved in being worship, well, there's another serious weed in the wheat. I just don't know how useful it is. Like, I understand why a vicar or church leader needs a stipend. But I've been to Kenya and I've seen the mega church guys driving the top of the line Land Cruiser. This is like 25 years ago. But top of the line Land Cruiser, living in the massive mansion that I visited because I was the white missionary.
Yep.
And there is a massive, that just can't be, it's just not cricket. And the same with the TV evangelists. I've filmed, when I was starting out in TV, I worked in a Christian broadcast thing. And we filmed something Chirot. I've forgotten his name. Who's that TV event? No, a TV evangelist. I forgot his name. I've got them all mixed up. Anyway, that kind of, touch the screen. He was making like millions He's making absolute, and worship leaders that are the ones you can name. It's not on the same level as the mega church Americans or Kenyans, but is it
Well, I
not
mean, if you
dissimilar?
look at why do a lot of the people who aren't native to the USA, who are like worship artists,
Yeah.
end up in the USA? That's because where all the money is, and it's where the market is. And I mean, I've got a huge amounts of respect for Tim Hughes in particular. I used to know Tim. I don't really speak to him so much these days. But obviously through my connections at Worship Central, I talk to him, not like on the phone all the time, but enough. And I know that for him, like the record label whenever he had that album where it sounded like the Killers, I can't holding nothing back. That was it. I know that the record label wanted him to become like the touring itinerant worship artist in the USA, but he didn't feel it was right. And so he was like, I don't want to do this. And he stayed in the UK where it wasn't as lucrative. And I'm sure Tim makes a lot of money from Here I Am to Worship and the other royalties he earns. I'm sure he's lives in obviously he's a vicar, so he would have a church house. But I'm pretty sure like he'll get a significant amount of royalties from CCLI, let alone radio play, let alone streaming of both his material and covers. And this is what I mean. And I think unless I obviously can't speak for him, and I don't speak for him at all. I can only speak for me, and as I explained, my weeds amongst the wheat. And I love that phrase. I'll probably snurtle that and use it from now on because I think that's really spot on. Unless I check my own motives, which I'm not always prone to do, nor do I always want to. And sometimes I actively run from checking my own motives. But unless I really check my own motives, really check myself and allow other people to speak into my life and to give me the hard truths, then I might justify it and bend it into shape in any way, shape or form. So this is a process I'm going through at the moment with like consuming stuff. Like, I like drinking beer, for example, or eating, like, but the process I feel like God's really putting his finger on me at the moment is what's the thing, what's the thing behind the thing that motivates me sometimes to reach for that extra beer, even though I've had a few. And it's kind of why am I trying to comfort myself? And unless I'm really willing to engage on that level, both psychologically and spiritually or whatever.
So back to your point, and we don't know each other. We've had one chat before, but like I'm realizing, going back to that point, and this is why it's kind of relevant because I'm doing the same thing in a lot of ways. For me, the motorbike thing is a kind of grabbing hold of the now in some respects.
Yep.
But that residue thing again,
yeah.
I just like the idea of it. So we're kind of brushing over the business side of worship, and
I'm happy to go into that more if you want to.
I don't know, maybe. I think it's what people don't really think about.
They don't.
But also like that aspiration. So when I was 19, I didn't care about money, like at all. When I was waiting for Pilavarchi to phone me up about Australia, I lived on 60 quid a week. Half of that was rent of a room of a house where I got beaten up by one of the guys who just got out of prison. I mean, horrible stuff.
Oh my word, sorry.
No. I'm just story for another time. It's quite an interesting one. But I was money. It wasn't money. It was to seek after God, and for His purposes. That bit of me that doesn't quite figure it out is I was looking for God to use me in a way that was fulfilling. That's still kind of missing the mark, I think. Now, when we're talking about worship and becoming a worship leader, I had that, I had a few opportunities to do it and all that sort of stuff, and I kind of just getting pushed into youth work. And so that kind of struggle that I had was, I want to do that, but I'll do youth work because I want to serve God. And then my experience with youth work just kind of led me out the back door, because you know, I was told I didn't fit with the private school educated London sort of
Right.
church types, or at least I didn't aspire to be like that. The question I still I suppose I've still got is you were doing it. You said
Mhm.
you were a worship pastor. Uh,
Well, yes and no, and this is where it gets all complicated. And again, wheat amongst the weeds, weeds amongst the wheat. Like all that stuff you just said about motivation, absolutely. Like although there was I suppose in modern psychology terms, a shadow side of me that um, would have liked to have my name be a name, um, would have liked to have my songs sung, not sung like I can live in a massive out mansion and like bathe on beds of cash or whatever, but just because I was like I want to do something that's fulfilling that will pay, so that will pay my way to do the thing that I love doing.
and you had that picture at the beginning, right? You had a
Yeah,
picture that
yeah, totally. So
you
I
were
was like,
doing that.
no, I was genuinely, heart of hearts, I was doing it for God. But as I believe, to be honest with you, I would imagine if we were to take some of these like mega church worship pastors, I think they probably either think or maybe even are to an extent like all of us think they're doing it for God. But it's the other motivations that don't get talked about because we don't talk about Bruno. No, 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 no. We don't mention the war. Like it's kind of like if because it's almost like if you, and I think I don't know if it was in one of your videos or it was in something in regards to Soul Survivor. It might have been on that podcast. It was like if I mention to the person that holds the keys being the person that unlocks the potential platform for me to lead at Soul Survivor, get the record deal, just be on the, in front of people on the Sunday. If I confess that there's a part of me that's like proud. That's the word I always use. I think this. I've got a pride issue. All of a sudden, it's like the shutters come down and you're locked out. Um, and so it's almost like, do you know when we talk about purity culture?
Right.
Right. It's
Yeah.
almost the worship leader, like the sex stuff aside. It's almost like a pride version of purity culture, but in the context of ministry. So it's kind of like we have to keep ourselves from pride, otherwise, if you're seen to be being proud in the way that like you have to be pure in that way. But like everyone is as ego, and the people that, and I don't see how you can stand on a platform with a guitar or with a microphone, being a public speaker or a performer in whatever sense of the word, and not have any sense of ego. If you didn't, you wouldn't be on that platform, in my opinion.
Could you change ego to enjoying? And is that any better?
Um, hmm, yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm probably speaking more for myself when I say ego.
Because
I mean, I enjoyed being a worship pastor, guru type
Because
person.
I'm thinking about my cousin. He used to play like all bands around Romford and stuff, and I used to play
Yeah,
lead
yeah.
guitar for him when his guitarist was like, I don't know, tried to kill himself or something horrific. And it was really like Smashing Pumpkins
Right.
and then some, like proper like nihilistic stuff. And I used to love doing it, but before he ever went on stage, and he's a talented guy. He was really kicked about as a kid
Mm.
in a lot of ways, and then tried to somehow communicate that. Um, he used to throw up every time he went on stage. He absolutely hated it.
Right.
His nerves overtook him, and if it was him being a worship leader, he
Right.
would say, "No, I
That's
hated it. I hated it." So then,
that's
what would be his motivation?
yeah, good point. I mean, I'm just speaking more for me. And I certainly don't want to be cynical. And I'm aware in conversations like this, when you've had some kind of manner of church hurt, it's very easy to become bitter and cynical, and for it to be, and to throw the baby Jesus out with the bathwater. And I have over the past nearly 10 years been very guilty of that. I only feel over the last few years that I've got a good degree of healing to the point where I'm now like, well, I do want to be involved in the church somehow, but I don't just want to kind of like blindly go into it. So yeah, okay. I think the ego thing is, is probably a bit unfair because I wouldn't get up there now with that kind of, if I'm not that I'm that involved in playing or leading worship at all these days, but when I do, it's just kind of like I don't have that. I think the part of the problem with the whole thing is if you have that ambition because you want to be a worship pastor and make records, I think this is what I want to keep coming back to, the whole record thing.
Yeah.
That's where it gets convoluted, and I think in a lot of young people's minds, certainly in mine, there wasn't the distinction between being a worship artist and a worship pastor, because you saw the Matt Redmans, the Tim Hugheses, the Gareths, the Pete Jameses, the whoever, you aspired to be like, and you saw that they had records because that was part of the bag. But
is it still?
Well, there are a lot of worship records out there. So it must be, but I mean, it seems to be a bit more of a collective effort these days. If you think about like Maverick City Music, it's more like collectives and things. But like a lot of those people still have like TikTok accounts, Instagram accounts. They're doing reels, all the stuff you've got to do to peddle your music and get it out there. And I get it, and this is why it's so complex, because you're part of the machinery. Like, I still write songs. I don't write worship songs as much as I used to, right? But there's still part of me that's like, I feel like I have something to offer and I want people to hear it. But at the same time, I don't, there is a part of me that's kind of like, oh, maybe I should set up like a Instagram account for my music and do all the real stuff. And I know the mechanics of what I need to do to get my music heard.
Yeah.
And I know what playlists to try and approach and the press releases you need to write and the money you need to put into it and the deals you need to cut with the right people and who, and blah, 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 blah. That's completely different to being an employee of a church overseeing the music ministry.
So, gosh, okay, yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that at all. You're absolutely right. And a bit of me, like, if you've got a song you want to play, we should do it anyway, if you want, at the end.
I'm all right, thanks.
You don't want it? Okay.
No, I'll pass.
I thought it would be cool. And no, but yeah, there is a distinction there for the majority, but not for the minority. So, Soul Survivor, because everyone's going on about. Did you ever go to the festival?
No, I went to something called Passion for Your Name.
Oh yeah, okay.
In 2004, which was like a worship leader mini version that ran alongside Momentum.
Oh yeah, the younger one.
So I went to that. So that's the closest I ever got. And then I went to the retreat they put on that Christmas in Watford.
So I would say it's very similar. The kind of the idea still remains the same. The reason you're saying there's a distinction, I totally get. But in my head, Soul Survivor Festival, everyone says it was about Mike Pilavachi. He wasn't the draw at all. It was a record-selling boys. It definitely was.
Well, I mean, Soul Survivor had their own record label.
Yeah, they did.
I was thinking about this yesterday, incidentally, about some of the kind of like, I hate calling them lesser names because they're not lesser at all, but like I won't mention them.
Well, no, we can say it. The guys that didn't sell as many records were who? Go on.
Like Rex Allchurch. Like I remember, I mean, I don't know anything about him. I just remember, I just popped into my head yesterday, his album cover or his EP cover. This is Soul Survivor merch.
Right.
All right. And I was like, I wonder what happened to him. Or like, not that I know him really at all, other than I've had the odd tweet dialogue with him, like David Gate. I was thinking about his EP, I remember hearing his first EP, then his album, and at the time liking them. And then I know he moved to Trinity Cheltenham and then to the States. And as a young person of that era, like that was the goal, to get onto Survivor, because they had all the records.
But if you think that was the goal, but also that was the draw for the festival, that's what I'm trying to say.
Right, so, I'm sure it was.
No,
I would have gone if I could.
If you're a Christian, then yeah. But if you think like this is why I'm just like, oh, this is for me. This is the music aspect. Where you're saying there's a difference. There's a difference as someone that is a worship pastor, as you were. But there's not a difference as the audience or the
Yeah.
festival goer, and I think that distinction is they were celebrities that pulled in the crowds
Mm.
that then in my mind were then manipulated by Mike Pilavachi and the team that he'd created to support his sort of ego.
I, it's, but
it
I
it
think
is
it's.
joined up. You're saying it's separate, but I think it's joined up.
I think it is joined up. I mean, if you look at all those conferences and stuff,
And if the money went, so the guys that were selling those records and being told to and encouraged to and said this, the new generation need to hear your songs and every other justification for doing it, they're still going to do it. And how useful is that in what churches, really?
uh, again, it's. I think it's. Wheat amongst the weeds. It's so complicated because I think if I think to my mum's funeral, right, we had the Lord is my shepherd, which is not Grant Kendrick, the other guy who writes lots of prolific hymns, Stuart Townsend.
Yeah.
Stuart Townsend song. From a purely business point of view, he'll be making significant amounts of royalties off that song, and will have been for decades, since 1995 or whenever it was written.
He had I went to his house in '99 when I lived in Brighton.
Right,
And
okay, yeah.
And Church of Christ the King, which think about what that acronym is.
Right.
But it was those guys really that was a really different way of
Yeah. So on one level, you could argue the toss about all that, and I don't know him or anything. I'm not going to pass any judgment on him or his lifestyle or his choices, what he does or doesn't do with any money or royalties he earns. But I know from from my own perspective, like, I've been blessed by that song. That song really spoke to that, and recently, at my mum's funeral, like, it really that song, that psalm was my mum's favorite psalm. She really loved that song. It helped her, and so I think the songs and things in and of themselves, like, God, in my opinion, God can and does use anything, and he even, like, and the ironic thing about the whole Mike Pilavachi thing for me is, like, he had a prophetic word which actually in one of his last, what I believe to be possibly his last speaking engagements, when he came up to St. Tom's. And I got in, I'm no longer part of that church, but I got invited up by a friend who I used to work with, who knew some of the struggles I had, and said, why don't you come back one evening, because it might be really healing for you. And, Mike Pilavachi speaking, you can come then and just sort of slide in the back. And I did. And he had this prophetic word during this whole thing at the end, where he does, I see a rainbow, whatever. But he said things on that platform, and, like, my friend was the only person who knew that I was going. Like, I trust her. I've known her for years. I don't. She's not the type that's going to go around, well, Nick Law's coming back or anything. Like, and he said stuff from the front. Like, first he said, like, I think the Lord's saying someone who's here tonight who's not been in church for about 6.5 years, which I hadn't, who's said to himself, who's been deeply wounded, which I had, and has said to himself, I don't think I'll ever get over this. I'll ever get past this. And I'd only ever said that to God and my wife, like, stuff that he came out of his mouth, and it broke me. And it was the thing that broke a lot of my hurt when some of my former colleagues came up and prayed for me, knowing what I'd been through in that church. So I think, that's a really extreme example, but I think God can and does use anything, even those songs and things. But it's that's the fallen world we're living, isn't it? Like, and the problem is, then, this is why I don't like either extremes in the kind of conversations about church abuse, because it's like, I've experienced it. Like, I know what it's like. I know how it feels. I know how it absolutely demolishes you and disorientates you, and just can really destroy your faith at worst, or just leave you with a lot of baggage. Or residue is a really good phrase. I really like that phrase. A lot of like residue that you can't seem to like get off. Bit like you've been exposed to some kind of like radioactive cloud, and you're still coughing years later trying to back up something that's in your lungs. And but I also know, like, through those either really broken leaders or the songs or whatever, God can and does you really good things, and it's so messy, and that's the problem with the whole thing. If it was really black and white, like, oh, you know, that worship leader's raking it in and is a right twat, then we could all just disown the Hillsongs or whoever. And this is part of my issue. Like when I stand in church and a song comes on. This happened during Safeguarding Sunday, which was this Sunday. It just got in the Church of England gone by. You know, all this conversation happening about safeguarding, which is a wonderful thing. But part of me is a bit like, I could have done with this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, and I could have done that phone number and that person 10 years ago. But obviously it didn't exist. But it didn't exist because some ways the forerunners of what's happening now were going first amongst all that. And well, I don't mean, there's been obviously people for decades that have had church abuse happen, but it's only been, I think, over the last 10 years that we've actually started to talk about it, you know. But you know, I see some of the names that come up as the writers, and then I'm like, I'm drawn into this like really difficult position where I'm like, this is actually a really good song. I've had God speak to me through this song before. I've led this song before. Still really like it as a banging tune. But then you see a songwriter attached to it. I'm like, well, I know that they're involved in X, Y, and Z, and the leaders of that church were like this. And then it's like, and I was just talking to someone the other night saying, well, I didn't necessarily agree with like Freddie Mercury's lifestyle, you know, but I love Queen. And I'm willing to
but Gary, what about Gary Glitter?
Well, exactly. Well, no.
But that's what I mean. Like, yeah, how have you?
And I think that comes down to your values. Like, what is it? Where are you willing to draw the line? And some people in that audience, going back to the original thing about soul survival or whatever, everyone's going to come with their different values and their different life experiences. And some people will be able to just be all like, well, it's not that big a deal or whatever. And so for some people, it's like, I'm highly strung and traumatized, and it's the whole worship music thing is so complex because of it. It's if and this is where the industry side comes into it, because it just permeates everything. It's like craft beer and macro beer. When I mean macro beer, I mean like Carling and Stella Artois, and you know, you get like so many. The way the pub system works in the UK is there's 3 houses which are like completely independent. They're free to buy whatever the heck they want. There's tied houses which are owned by either a pub estate or a brewer or even a brewery, and they only sell, if they're owned by the brewery, they'll only sell generally the beers, you know, that brewery brews. Or if they're tied, it means that they've got some kind of deal going on.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of worship music's like the tied house, in that we're offered a choice of the same 4 macro lagers with different badges on. Elevation, Hillsong, Bethel, and the Tomlin type kind of passion stuff. And it's all the same. Where the craft beers in the world of worship music, you know, the independent songwriters, and they're there, but they are serving in local churches. But unless they play the game, do the TikTok reels and cook the figures and get the algorithms
and say they're not proud,
and say they're not proud,
yeah.
and so on, they don't get heard. So some of the like when I did my album Christus Victor in 2010, my friend Andy, who was who helped me record it, like he was the person that ran the record label. Like he went around to all the record labels like Integrity Music before it became not Kingsway version. This was another Integrity Music, which merged in America with David C. Cook and got swallowed up into that. So that's just a little bit of the politics for you right there.
Right.
But he went around saying this is the best worship record you'll never hear. And like, I'm not, and maybe I am being arrogant and proud and say it's like I felt and feel like when my writing isn't just like everything else, you know, like, oh, it's just like another worship song. Like, you know, I've always tried to make them interesting, tried to make the lyrics really good, tried to make music that would stand up against actual music.
But the distinction for me is like being an artist, being someone that, you know, if I want to put on some music to, you know, to like feel something or engage with God or whatever, an artist can do that. Putting on music which is about corporate singing that sells albums that you can sing along in the car or whatever, I just don't know if that's the right format. I just don't know if it's the right place. And I think,
Well, I mean, again, those songs are produced in a way that they are produced. So, like, we'll take Gareth's live album as an example. You know, you listen to the record and like, oh, it's a local church being recorded live. But I remember like whoever was producing the record coming out at the end saying we need to do these 3 songs again because the congregation didn't sound lively enough. Right. So we've got a photographer on the front of the stage going, clapping, trying to get people to clap along while they redid the first song. Or through a live record I did with Andy, you know, and I get it completely from the having something that looks good and sounds good produce perspective. You know, we filmed the close-up shots during the day so that the camera person wasn't in the face of everyone, you know, or in all our faces during the live thing, which is what a lot of those like Bethel records do. You know, they'll do all those close-up shots and the pickup shots during the day, and then the stuff that's wider angle will be from the quote-unquote live thing in the evening. But a lot of the live thing in the evening gets overdubbed anyway, so the only stuff that tends to be really live really is the audio, the congregation. Sometimes I've been involved in new wine records where even that's overdubbed. So things get overdubbed. So yeah, it's from that perspective, it's like, and this is what I don't like. This is why I find it all sticky, Nicky. I'm like, you're presenting something that you're saying is one thing, but it's not. Like if it's a live record, do a live record, and yeah, brush it up, edit it afterwards, and brush it up. It's like if you take a Coldplay live record, for example, like that's live. You know, and because you can hear some of the inflections in Chris Martin's voice that aren't perfect, you know, or the odd, you know, mistake on guitar or whatever. But they've, you know, it's done live. Now, obviously, they're a touring band and they're going to be more on it and note perfect than even some of the decent session players that play in churches. But it's when it gets presented as one thing, so that for the average, I don't know, 19-year-old sat in the UK watching Bethel, and they're looking at Bethel's new album, and they think, man, yeah, I love Bethel. Wow, look, I really want to go to BSSM because it's going to be like that.
I think it's a metaphor, isn't it? It's a metaphor. What you're saying is a metaphor for me.
How so?
You're presenting a live album of what that moment was, as dressed up as something complete. It's AI'd. It's
whatever. An idealistic version of what you know, and it's funny because
filtered.
Well, some of those live streams you hear from like Bethel or some of the other larger, like we'll take Soul Survivor as the example. Then, like if you know, on the odd occasion, I'll tune into their live stream out of complete curiosity. You know, I'm just curious, and it was mostly during the time all these announcements came out because I was interested in what the church had to say about it.
Yeah.
And when the band played,
which was nothing.
I gathered. When the band played, the drums sounded mega, and the sample replaced. I've seen packs advertised and stuff on YouTube on like how to sample replace your drums live for church live streaming. So, you know, there's always a production aspect to it, and it's always I can never quite get my head around it these days when I don't really go to worship conferences anymore, so I don't know if this is the conversation, but I know from the ones I was, you know, I'd go to back in 2012, there'd be conversations about how it's all worship and stuff, but then in the next seminar, I'd be like, so when you're introducing the click track, this is what you do, and then the pad sound comes in, and, you know, and you can use lights to these effects and so on, and this is what you were getting at about in your video about how the aesthetic
Yeah.
is manipulative, and it's like, well, all those things are used to manipulate because music does, and this is some of the most powerful moments of musical worship, musical song worship, however you want to phrase that, have come for me when, like, in my own worship leading. I'll give you an example. We had Al Gordon. You remember Al Gordon from HTB, Worship Central?
Not really. I was
okay.
probably out of it all by then.
You probably were. So he was the co-host of the Worship Central podcast, and so for a while, as part of Alpha and stuff, was like one of the sort of names, so to speak. I think he's a vicar now at a church in Hackney. Nice guy, really funny guy and really sweet guy. Real kind of comedian as well, and you'll find out why in a minute. But like we invited him up at St Thomas for a student conference in 2014, and like the EA guys, really good guy called there was my friend Tim, but what was the other guy's name? Why can I see his face but can't remember his name? He was also called Tim, I think. That's going to be really awkward if I see him now and his actual name is Rob or something. But like...
lovely guy. Lovely guy.
And he did like sound at the university and stuff. So he was like, like a pro engineer.
Yeah.
But he was quite young. And so he ordered this like really spec, because the budget was there, it's really spec'd up PA.
Yeah.
And then halfway through leading with the band and everything, he blew it. He blew the PA and it all conked out. And so I had to just do it like literally with my acoustic guitar into the room. Yeah. And that was the most powerful thing about the whole conference. And then, so there was that moment. But then right at the end of the actual like Sunday evening when I was leading again with the full band and PA on and all the lights and stuff, I was going to joke and say fog machine, but we didn't have a fog machine. I really was like souping it up, trying to be the worship leader guy, and even my another friend called Tim, who was an intern of mine, who is now a vicar, at the time, pulled me aside the next day and said, I think you were putting on a show when you're a bang out of order. And I was like, you respect my authority, I believe it, respect, and I pulled that card, and I apologized to him when I saw him recently and said, I'm really sorry about that. But he was right. But yeah, after that little episode, like Al Gordon had to leave early to get the train back to London. And we were having this like moment of prayer and praying and stuff. And I'd get the guitar, and he's like, anyway, I need to go now, folks. So I'm going to leave you with whoever it was, and amen. And then he just pressed all my guitar pedals, distortions, tremolos, so like this little like quiet plinky plong light. It was like, and then he just sort of like, see you later. But there's no easy answer, and I think the more souped up your congregational worship gets, and I'll use that in the musical term, the more souped up it gets, the more complicated it gets.
And I think the total other end of that spectrum, but you reminded me completely again when I was in Kenya with Soul Survivor, during that course, it was 1999, and it's when Kenya had discovered PAs.
Right.
Oh my goodness. And it was a really interesting sort of difference that when we were near Nairobi, which is the capital, in Nakuru, there was this PA, and all you could hear is distorting, like everything was on 10.
Yeah.
And the further north we went, as it became more rural, and it was an incredible opportunity. Like the people had never seen white skin before, and it was time before mobiles and everything else, and TVs, and Manchester United getting everywhere. The really interesting thing was there was no PAs, and the worship was just like, oh my goodness. I was taught so much in those environments, just how to worship, where it was the complete flip side of this is what a PA does to it. Yeah.
And it's interesting because you mentioned that video you did about the music, about monks.
Yeah.
So obviously with the whole brewing beer thing, I have quite a keen fascination on all things monastic.
Yeah. Buckfast.
probably more for those reasons than anything. Although I'm with the exception of Sunday, Saturday, I'm fasting beer from now until Christmas. Saturday, I'm having there's a local bottle shop, which is my first customer, so I'm going to go support them and have a beer there. But I'm going to fast beer till Christmas.
What, Christmas Day will be your first one, or Christmas Eve?
Oh, I'm not that far ahead yet. I'm taking it one day. It sounds like I'm recovering alcoholism.
Yeah.
But
I think you need to make a
yeah,
decision. Go on, which
yeah.
day? Which day?
I
Which
feel
day?
like you need to.
Go
Yeah,
on.
I'm not sure yet.
Go on,
But,
which one?
Christmas Eve, I think.
Okay.
I think Christmas Eve will do.
Great.
But I visited Mount St Bernard Abbey near Loughborough, which is home of Tint Meadow, which is the UK's only Trappist brewery.
Oh yeah, right.
So for a brewery to be Trappist, it has to be brewed in a monastery, either by or under the supervision of monks.
Yeah.
And so when I went, I mean, there's a lay brewer there now, but when I went, it was one of the fathers doing it, a guy called Father Mateus from Poland, which is where he's gone back to. And it was interesting hearing him talk and then looking around the abbey itself after, and how, like, the whole charismatic evangelical shalabba thing is just not a thing.
No.
You know, it's choral, it's, you know, it's in privacy or in the fellowship of the brothers there. And it's just, you know, and I know it's just a different means of communicating with God and worshipping together and so on. And in its own way, that's as valid as the whole, yeah, we'll put Bog Machine on and razzmatazz and so on.
Is it? Is it?
No, I'm saying that's a bit political. No, of course it's not. No, I think
because I'm not into evensong. Like I don't go and think, oh, this is really connecting me to God. I just don't. The prayers, when I'm with the monks and I know they've been there like 40, 50 years, and they do this every single day at these times, their life is doing. For me, the gravity that they've created in that place, you know, that's moving and that's significant. But the actions or the melodies, I'm not sure that leads me to God as such.
I don't know, but this is what I mean.
Does the fog machine? I'm not sure. It makes me excited and makes me feel like it gives me some dopamine or whatever physically happens.
I don't know. I think this is why it's. I know I keep using the word complex, but I think this is why conversations like this are important more than like people trying to discuss things over Twitter, because you can never have a complex conversation over Twitter. But it is complex because I don't know what God's doing in the recesses of someone's heart for good or bad. Well, on the bad extreme, we saw who knows what's happening in the recess of my Blavatsky's heart. Evidently, things. Negative fruit. But like for someone, then you know, God might speak to somebody really powerfully through a fog machine for whatever reasons He chooses to use it, and it's on that kind of level, it's really complicated. But on a computer, but if we don't, if the church, particularly in the West, or anyone that uses a fog machine or light, don't actively say to themselves, why are we doing this? Yeah. And really assesses their motives as to why they're doing it, then that's an issue. I've got no problem with like a purple LED strip. If I go in an evening and there's a purple strip on, it's quite ambient and nice. In the same way, if I go into a cathedral and there's candles, but I've got a friend who went into a church and saw that and was like, oh, you know, and so I'm like.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like the historic thing of like candles makes sense because they were a light source. If it was dark, light some candles, then we bring that in.
But you can imagine like someone back in the whatever century that was being like, look at these people with their candles bringing artificial lights. You know, the Lord's hours are the ones that are bright and the ones that are dark, we go to sleep. You know. And...
Yeah, but fog machine. I just think this business and cash and a PA system that costs 80 grand and the guitar. Like I always wanted a Taylor.
I do agree with that, to be honest.
You know, I wanted a Taylor and all of this sort of stuff and Mesa Boogie amp and you know like
a Nord.
yeah, exactly. So for
praise the Lord, oh my soul.
but for me, I mean, even this channel, right? So as soon as I start monetizing it, do I get money out of having these conversations? Well, it'd be great to pay for like the camera kit and this laptop and all this stuff. So kind of yes. So am I being hypocritical as I ask the question? Can I monetize this? I want to really think about that. I'm able to do it because I've got a job tomorrow, you know, where it's typical kind of corporate stuff, and that'll pay for it. But I'm still struggling, and this conversation I've really found valuable. I just still really struggle though with thinking worship leader, worship artist is a thing. And should continue being a thing.
That's what the undoing was for me when I in 2014, and I started to think I'd had this dream one night, and it was so vivid. And the Lord Jesus said to me, "You're going to go for your biggest challenge yet." And a few years before that, I'd had a nervous breakdown, and so I'm like, "Oh, great, thanks God." And I'd only just come through this period. Like, I'm like, "Great, you know, everything was on an even keel, and now this." But the only way I can describe it was like the grace was taken away for leading worship, and I started to question: have I made a thing out of a thing that's not even a real thing? And I think the answer to that question is yes. Like, and this is why I joke about the term worship guru, because I'm just like, well, I can see being a vicar is a legitimate thing. It's a legitimate job. If I'm taking the kind, even on its base, if God didn't exist level, right?
Yeah.
Being a vicar is a thing. Like, there is a minister as part of an organisation who gets some money, not much, albeit, but gets some money and a house to live in to do their vicaring thing. What is a worship leader? Essentially, it's a musician, because no one ever goes, and now we're going to worship, and then we, you know, in the charismatic church, and then we start chanting, or we start doing something else that gives God worth. It's always like let's worship the Lord. The hand splays out towards the band, and it's like click track in 1, 2. You know, that's in the ears and stuff like the bank in the ear. Guitar in 2, 3, 4, and like, and that is what people equate to worship. And even though those conversations happen of like, oh, well, worship is more than that, let's face it, like a lot of for the average person, when they say worship, they mean music. And so, yeah, being a music minister might be a thing. Even you get paid to oversee the music, you get paid to coordinate bands and make that and facilitate that happening on a Sunday. And I know people could say, well, you've just been pedantic with titles and stuff, but I think it's the word worship that is the problem, because I felt like, hang on, I'm being told this cup is red. Look at this nice red cup. It's so red and vibrant and red. I'm like, well, no, that's the kind of greeny blue color. No, but it's red. It's red.
Right.
It's red.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously at its worst level, that's gaslighting. I don't know. I don't. I just know for me that I think there is value in music. I think God can and does use anyone and everything, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. If he wants to use a smoke machine to speak to someone, he can. But for my own personal preference, I don't agree with smoke machines or lights, and I think they're unnecessary. It's like if a church entertains getting a digital desk. You know, it's like, well, do you need it? Like, you know, you know, if your church, maybe if you are a mega, maybe as a mega church, maybe you do need it, because it's easier for you to set up, you know, recall settings,
yeah,
and it just loads them all up, so you haven't got that setup time, and you can focus on just mixing it and so on. But if you're a small church, you don't need it. Can you plug a mic and guitar or piano or whatever into it? Does a volunteer know how to run it without being stressed out their heads, which most of them are? Because the minute the sound goes down, it's sort of like everyone turns and look. Oh, there's a bit of feedback.
Well, we see the wizard behind the curtain at that point.
Yeah. The funny thing about the PA thing that I also mentioned to someone the other night was a lot of these churches, the big ones, like have got better rigs than a lot of small music venues, and that. I just find endlessly fascinating the amount of money that goes into state-of-the-art digital desks and lighting rigs, and again, I think that's where it's like the church needs to take a step back. But when I would imagine when you're, and I speak partly through experience and partly through knowing how the things kind of work, I would imagine if you're so in the thick of it, your nose is so far close to the glass that you don't get the wider picture, and you justify it. You can justify buying that PA. You can justify buying the Nord. You know, do you need a Nord? You know, no. Does it sound nice? Yeah, it sounds nice, but you don't need it. Um, and like, I genuinely believe when we die and we're stood before the Lord, who reveals all things to us from all angles, from His angle, from how, and we see ourselves in the cold light of day. All that stuff's just gonna like just seem so insignificant. And a lot of that church stuff and like running around, I've got to put the worship curve together. And that made me laugh by the worship curve. I'm like, I remember that. I used to teach that on the West Central Academy, and I justified it. And I like, and yeah, it is a musical. It's just a musical journey, and and on one level, it's like, yeah, well, it's just a tool to enable blah blah blah. But it's like, well, you can use it to manipulate people, and it's weed amongst the weeds. It's such a minefield, and I think, and then I think the record thing and the publishing thing only convolutes it all the more.
Yeah.
And if we're putting the expectation upon young people, young impressionable people in particular, like you was and like I was, and like some of the kids now, that if you do X, Y, and Z, and now it's going viral rather than getting a record deal with such and such. If you go viral with your song,
Yeah.
it will get sung in churches. You'll make money off it. You'll be able to have a nice living. Everyone will hear your song.
Well, you'll be known is more.
You'll
I
be
think
known, yeah.
That's
and you'll
the
be
thing.
known, and people want to be known and
Yeah.
to feel known, and and again, that's why I was saying about ego, and I don't necessarily mean ego to be kind of like I'm like Freddie Mercury or whoever, prancing around the stage. Just you're making it about you, and it's interesting because all those conferences, like the HTV leadership conference or something like that, it's like there are no conferences about serving. There are no conferences that really glorify. Right, everyone next. Okay, everyone
Yeah,
at the
right.
conference next to your seat, you will find a toilet brush and a pair of marigolds and a duster. I want you to go through the whole. We're going to bless the. I'm trying to do it in my best HTV voice. We're going to bless the the host, and we're going to give this venue a thorough scrub. There isn't a conference like that because, or a conference that's what you should aspire to be, like a stay-at-home mum or a stay-at-home dad,
or a conference about death.
Yeah. I mean, well, there probably are conferences about.
Are there? Well, I doubt they're very well attended.
I think there's something called Care for the Family, which deals with like grieving and stuff.
I don't mean grieving. I mean like
right.
I mean all of us. Like just talk about death.
Right. Oh no,
'cause-
no. It's we love to brush death under the carpet, and we don't talk about Bruno as far as death's concerned.
But you're very you're absolutely right. What conferences are there that are as big as those music worship conferences?
Well, it's either the church growth and church leadership or the music ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always those two. They're the sexy things. People love the idea of leadership. It gets talked about so much.
Yeah, it does.
And yeah, I mean, on one level, it's really important that people get it right, because if you don't, as we have seen, then all kinds of terrible things happen.
But equally, those aren't there to create an echo chamber of theology and networking, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's what are we aspiring to? Yeah. What are we setting our hearts towards? If it's church growth, and I'm not involved in any of that anymore, so I don't know how the collective conversation has changed, if it's changed at all. But back during the sort of heyday, so to speak, of my being involved in church, it was all about church planting, church growth, and being a leader and being a disciple who disciples disciples and all this sort of stuff. And
so just sort of trying to wrap up a little bit. And I know I just forced on that word. It's just because I've been thinking about it with residue.
That's fine.
How, just to finish off like our conversation, how do you then see your experience affecting you now in terms of your relationship with Jesus, the way that you see other people, the way you engage with church, and what I think other people have started commenting, the view of themselves. So through what you've been, and I know we didn't talk about some of the aspects of of what affected you so much. I know we haven't covered that at all. We were talking about music, so sort of keep that in some ways to one side. But you sound like your default is to say it's really complex. But my question is, I don't think it is. And then where does that lead? I mean, you've started.
Yeah,
You've started a brewery.
I'm happy to disagree on that. For agree to disagree, and that's what I think is healthy about conversations like this. Is that you can land in different places, and I think the danger with any conversation is, and this is why I think Twitter's so toxic. I only logged into Twitter to see if a customer of mine from the brewery who uses it had responded to say if they wanted some beers for their shop when I saw your message, because I've come off it now basically in favour of Blue Sky. But it's it's so hard to have we've had an hour and a half maybe not that long, but we've had a good lengthy discussion on this topic and kind of gone around the houses and throughout the streets and not really landed anywhere. And I think that's right, because it needs debating and discussing. Where it's left me is it's hard because it's complex. That's the underlying headline.